There's a book I read earlier this fall. I've talked with some of you about it. It's been on my bookshelf for a long time, and I finally pulled it down and read it. It's a book that I can best describe as a fairy tale for adults, because it reads like a fairy tale, but it's certainly not for children. Though, if any of you have ever actually read the tales of the Brothers Grimm, you know those aren't really for children either. This book is about a 12-year-old boy named David in London, just as World War II is starting. His mother is very sick with cancer and eventually dies. His father is heartbroken and finds solace in the nurse who helped care for his late wife, and they eventually marry each other. As the bombs begin to fall on London, the family is moved outside the city to a country house. David doesn't like his new family, this new house, his new life. A little brother is born, and the resentment grows all the more. This new brother is changing everything. His stepmother is changing everything that he loved and knew. David is changing too. He becomes angry and resentful. In this strange house, David hears the books on the shelves of his room begin to speak their stories to him. A strange figure known only as the Crooked Man slinks around the periphery of the boy's life, inviting him further into the dark stories by feeding his resentments. One night, a German bomber crashes down in the back garden, opening up a hole in the ground where David discovers an entrance into a new world. Eagerly, he goes off to explore it, only to find himself now cut off from his old life. This new world that he discovers is strange, dangerous, and filled with creatures who mean him harm. It's an unsettled world where David isn't sure who to trust or how to get out. He meets a woodsman who rescues him and tells them that what he needs to do is get to the king. Surely the king will know what to do and how to get him home. But the king hasn't been seen for a long time. David decides to make that long and dangerous journey to the king's castle in the hope that the king is alive and able to help. On that journey, David encounters tragedy, mistrust, and lies. He learns how to use his instincts and develops a bravery that allows him to escape several dangerous situations. At each and every turn, the people he encounters are fearful in the face of what seems like certain oncoming destruction. Everyone seems to think the king can do something, but the king is nowhere to be found. All they're left with in the moment is their own fears, and their fears are growing more real with each passing calamity. Israel, at the time of our Isaiah passage, was living through its own period of lost things. Israel itself had been lost, conquered by the Babylonians, with all of the important people carried off into exile in Babylon. Those who were left in what was left of Jerusalem could only look upon the ruins of the temple and the king's palace and feel lost. As this Isaiah is writing, the exiles have returned, and everyone finds that it's not quite as easy to put those two broken pieces back together again. Something has been lost in the long span of years. Much more than a temple and a palace had been broken, lost by the Babylonian destruction. If Israel is going to be a people of God again, then they're going to need God's help in a mighty way, because this time the calamity is within themselves. And a mighty God is exactly what they get. God tells Israel, broken and fractured and lost as it is, that there will be a new creation. The former things, the old life, as they had it, the previous way of living, is not going to be remembered. It will not be put back together. What was lost will stay lost and will not, should not come to mind, because God will create a new people as a delight and a joy and a celebration. And then God lays out a vision, replete with metaphors which still resonate with us these millennia later. A wolf and a lamb feed together. A lion eats the food of an ox. Those who are enemies, in conflict, with death as a part of their way of life, will find life together in one another as a new creation. God's vision will lead to God once again giving life, which will transform Israel from what it was into what it will be. Israel is now assured of God's presence, even without a temple, even without a king. All of the fear and disappointment and anger resolves in a new Jerusalem. God gives Israel a new vision of how humanity and God form a relationship. That's the promise. But believing in the promise, trusting in the commitment when things don't immediately show improvement, well, that's the challenge. That's what Jesus encounters in this moment when he stands before the now second rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. And while others are admiring the building, Jesus recognizes that the building isn't really the important thing at all. The real important thing is his presence with them. The important thing is God's presence, which a building can't contain, or more accurately, constrain. Hearing what Jesus says must have been a shock to those people gathered. No one admiring some beautiful and important thing likes to be told, oh, that's really not going to last. Jesus challenges them to remember that there was a time when the temple wasn't there, but God still was. And he invites them to imagine God's presence with them in a way which goes beyond what they see and experience now. He's asking them to trust in a future. But they want a sign, something to give them help in navigating all of this he's telling them. I imagine they weren't real thrilled with the answer that he gives them. He begins with a warning, which is never a good way to hook your audience. The warning is not to be led astray by those who claim to speak for Jesus. The point of this teaching from Jesus isn't to focus on the fearful stuff, the wars and the earthquakes and plagues, but the future coming of Jesus and the inspiration we get from knowing he's coming to be with us. Don't listen, he seems to say, to the crooked men who tell you what they think Jesus says. Listen to Jesus. Trust in Jesus. Follow where Jesus goes. And what Jesus says is this: whatever may happen in life, to us, to those we love, to our buildings and our traditions, not a hair of your head will perish. Not a hair of your head will be extinguished. We will have life and a future with Jesus because he shows us the way through the challenges and chances and changes of life. And that way to God lies through letting the lost things remain lost and looking to God to build something new. It's our fears which drive us, compel us to tear apart and tear down God's creation. Predictions may be great for college football games, but the stakes go up when we allow our fears to make predictions for all of us and our life. We live here in real space with real people and real lives. In the midst of all of that, God is making a new heaven and a new earth, a kingdom without weeping or distress, with blessing and abundance and life for all, a kingdom of peace where the wolf and the lamb feed together on God's holy mountain. To see it requires a vision beyond fearful voices, overcoming present insecurities, and living in trust and endurance to gain your soul. That book I was telling you about is by John Connolly, and it's called The Book of Lost Things. It's those lost things, things the crooked man tells us we can preserve, which create the fear. What the boy discovers is that the world he finds himself in is really just a creation of the king's fear and regret. The crooked man offers David the chance to take the king's place for a price, for a deadly price. A price David was almost certainly willing to pay before he made this dangerous journey through this new world. The boy is faced with the opportunity to get what he wished for to come true. But David's experience and the wisdom from this experience makes him smart enough to realize that to take the offer presented will only replace the old king's fears with his fears. David has to wrestle with himself and sort his fears from his dreams. What David realizes in this moment is you became a ruler without power, haunted always by the betrayal of someone smaller and weaker than yourself, whom you should have protected, someone who trusted you to stand up for them. And once you had struck the bargain, there was no way back. For who could return to their old life, knowing the terrible thing that they had done? Fear can lead us to do terrible things. The things that are lost when we're afraid are best left lost. Jesus is asking us not to lose ourselves out of fear. When we're driven by fear and resentment, it creates a world we can't easily get out of, and others can find themselves trapped by our fear. All of us have moments in our life story when we could choose anger. All of us have moments when we're frustrated. I have about 7,000 a day. Annoyed, feeling rejected, bitter about the direction that life is going. While we don't live in an age of persecution, the church was built in an age of persecution, and that's important to remember so that we don't become the persecutors in our own day. Suffering seems to be, for whatever unfathomable reason, and I can't give you an answer, part of the human predicament. But it need not define us, scar us, disfigure us, and those innocent ones around us who look to us for hope. When we're the most fearful, it's often because we're unable to focus on the unexpected creativity of God in the moment. That's why we need one another. It's why we need a church community. It's why we need God. And of all the things in life that are lost, we will never lose God.